Most men lose power long before they even realize they had it. Not because they're weak, not because they are undeserving, but because they give too much of themselves, too early, too eagerly. And once that happens, respect begins to fade, slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like water leaking from a jar, until one day it's empty. This is the story of one man, a man who thought he knew the rules, but was about to learn them the hard way. He had met her online, a casual connection at first, a swipe, a match, a few messages, but he felt something deeper, something rare, something he thought he had to protect at all costs. He laughed at her jokes, even the bad ones. He answered instantly, even when he was busy. He explained things more than he needed to. He adjusted his schedule just to align with hers. All because he wanted to matter. All because he wanted her attention. All because he didn't realize he was giving away his power. The first week was perfect. Texts flew back and forth. Laughs were exchanged. Plans were made. Promises, subtle and unspoken, were built, and he felt important, needed, wanted. That feeling is dangerous, because when a man begins to chase validation, he stops protecting his dignity, he stops choosing himself, and in that moment, he becomes predictable. He didn't notice the little things at first. Her replies were still warm, but shorter. She stopped initiating conversations as often. She began taking longer to respond. And still, he kept trying. Always. Because the mind confuses availability with connection. Because effort feels like love. Because proving yourself feels like power. But it's not. By the end of the second week, he was already trapped. He rearranged his plans for her, canceled commitments, answered texts at odd hours, sought reassurance, not because she asked, but because he feared losing her attention, and that fear leaks energy, and energy reveals weakness. One evening, it hit him. He sent a long message, pouring out thoughts, explaining himself, laughing too hard, apologizing too much, and she didn't reply. Not immediately, not in 10 minutes, not even in an hour. He stared at his phone. The light flickered across the room. He read his message again, wondering where it went wrong. And that's when panic whispered in his mind. What did I do? Should I send another? Is she losing interest? That whisper is dangerous because it's the voice of emotional dependence, and dependence kills attraction. The next morning, he woke up restless. He checked his phone. No message. Nothing. He tried to distract himself, worked, exercised, ate breakfast, but every few minutes his eyes returned to the screen. That compulsion is invisible to the man who feels it. It only reveals itself through anxiety, and anxiety is the first sign you've lost leverage. He tried reasoning. Maybe she's busy. Maybe she's tired. Maybe it's nothing. But deep down, he knew something had changed, something subtle but permanent. Because when someone notices your anxiety, they notice your energy, and energy cannot be hidden. That afternoon, she replied, a short, casual message, nothing dramatic, nothing apologetic, but he felt the familiar pull, the need to answer perfectly, the need to explain himself again. And that is how dependence grows, not from external pressure, but from your own internal craving for validation. Days passed. He became a student of her behavior, analyzing every pause, every word, every tone. and every observation fed his need to respond faster, better, more intensely, until he realized he was no longer living his own life, he was living her reactions. And that is the moment attraction dies. One night, he decided to text first, not out of desire, but out of fear. Fear that if he waited, she might lose interest. He hit send, watched the dots appear, heart pounding, and this time she didn't reply for hours. Hours. Minutes stretched like days, and in those hours, something inside him shifted, because he realized he was addicted to her attention, not in a healthy way, but in a way that made him powerless. That night, he didn't sleep well. He stared at the ceiling, replayed every interaction, replayed every word, every emoji, wondered where it all went wrong, and more importantly, what he had been giving away without noticing. And that is when clarity began to creep in. Because the moment a man feels powerless, he only has two choices: chase harder and lose himself, or step back and reclaim his center. He didn't know it yet, but the choice was already made. Tomorrow, everything would begin to change. The man who chased would learn that stopping is the only way to regain control. Silence can be heavier than words. He stared at the phone again. No message, no notification, just emptiness. The room was quiet, too quiet. His own breathing suddenly felt loud. Every tick of the clock reminded him he had been waiting, and waiting is a trap. Hours passed. He tried to keep busy, worked on tasks, scrolled aimlessly, even cleaned his room. But every 30 seconds, his eyes flicked back to the screen. A small vibration, a false notification, a spike of hope, and then nothing. That is when fear begins to grow. Not fear of her, but fear of losing himself. Because when you chase too much, you attach your worth to attention you cannot control, and that attachment suffocates attraction. He remembered the early days, when laughter came easily, when conversations were effortless, when attention felt natural and constant. And now, that same attention was missing, and with it, he felt his power drain. He tried to rationalize. Maybe she's busy. Maybe she's tired. Maybe this silence is nothing. But rationality is weak when emotion is screaming. The first real test came the next evening. She finally responded. A casual message, short, neutral. Nothing to provoke panic, but enough to awaken it. He wanted to respond immediately, pour himself into words, explain why he hadn't messaged sooner, laugh, joke, reassure. But then a thought struck him. What if he didn't? What if he stayed calm? What if he didn't react from fear? What if he let the silence speak instead? And that small hesitation was the beginning of his awakening. Because when a man stops reacting, he begins to reclaim himself. He typed a reply, short, neutral, no emotion layered on top, no justification, just presence. Hey, I'm good. How's your day? And then he put the phone down, sat in silence, let the weight of his own choice settle. She read it, paused, reread it. The next few hours, no reply. And now the anxiety returned, the compulsion, the urge to check. But he resisted. For the first time in weeks, he resisted. The next day, he caught himself thinking, what am I doing? Why do I care so much about her attention? And that question is the doorway to clarity, because self-awareness always begins with discomfort. He began noticing patterns he had ignored before, how he had changed his schedule, how he had explained himself too much, how he had tried to predict her moods, how he had given without boundaries. And the truth was unavoidable. He had lost himself. Then came the first moment of true temptation. She sent a message late at night, short, casual. Are you awake?
Every instinct screamed to respond immediately. Every cell in his body begged for connection. Every thought whispered, "This is your chance, don't waste it." But he didn't. He waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Breathing slowed. Heart rate calmed. And when he finally replied, it was calm, measured, controlled. "Yeah, just finishing up some work. What's up?" No over-explanation, no eagerness, just presence. And that tiny shift sent ripples across the relationship because she noticed, subtle, unconscious, emotional. When someone is no longer predictable, they become magnetic. He began experimenting, not with manipulation, not with games, but with self-control, responding later, pausing before replying, keeping his own schedule, prioritizing his own life. And every time he did, he felt power returning. The anxiety never disappeared completely. It still lurked, a whisper in the back of his mind, a test of his patience. But each time he resisted, he felt stronger, more grounded, more himself. Then came a subtle test, a short, seemingly innocent message. "Are you busy tomorrow?" Before, he would have dropped everything, rearranged his plans, answered immediately. Now, he paused, not to play a game, not to manipulate, but to maintain his center. He replied later, simple, clear, "Yeah, free in the evening." And that small act of calm spoke louder than any long explanation ever could. Days passed, the dynamic was shifting. She was no longer unconsciously leading, she was observing, she was recalibrating, she was responding to him. Because the man who stops chasing, stops leaking energy, stops surrendering power, stops giving away attention without value. And that is when respect begins to return. But before the full reversal, there is always one last tension spike, one final emotional test. And for him, it was coming soon. The next evening, she sent something unexpected. Not a message, not a question, a subtle comment. "You feel different lately." Those words carried weight, not accusation, not curiosity, recognition. Recognition that he had changed. Recognition that he was no longer the man who chased. Recognition that he had found himself. He didn't react immediately, didn't over-explain, didn't try to fix her perception. He allowed it to exist. Silence followed. Not awkward, not tense. Perfect. Because the moment she fully recognizes his calm, the reversal is inevitable. The power has shifted.
Power is never demanded. It is felt. And when someone senses it, their energy shifts. He had changed, not dramatically, not outwardly, but internally. The man who had chased was no longer chasing. That night, she reached out again. A short message. "Hey, just checking in." Before, his hands would have trembled slightly as he typed. Before, his mind would have raced through explanations and justifications. Now, he paused. He thought. He breathed. He allowed himself to respond on his own terms. "Hey, I'm doing well. How's your evening?" No overcompensation, no eagerness, just calm. She noticed, not immediately, not consciously, but the subtle shift in energy. She felt it. For the first time, he wasn't reacting. He wasn't chasing. He wasn't giving away attention freely. He was present, and presence commands respect. Over the next few days, the small interactions began to change. She engaged differently. She asked questions. She initiated conversations. She laughed at his jokes. But this time, it was intentional, not casual, not dependent, not unconscious. She was now meeting him where he was, not the other way around. The moment of truth came unexpectedly. One evening, she said something that almost startled him. "You feel different, more confident." He didn't explain. He didn't justify. He simply acknowledged it. "Yes, I've been focusing on myself." And that simple statement did more than any message he had ever sent before, because it wasn't about her, it was about him, and people respect clarity. The subtle tension that had haunted him for weeks, the anxiety, the compulsion, the need for validation, all dissolved quietly. She didn't leave, she didn't resist, she didn't demand, she adjusted, she responded, she respected, and that is the reversal. From that point on, the relationship dynamic was different, no longer driven by fear, urgency, or chasing, now guided by presence, self-direction, and emotional discipline. The man who had once given everything was now whole, calm, centered, undeniable. And the lesson is simple. Chasing never wins. Effort without boundaries never attracts. Validation you seek externally is fleeting. Power comes from self-control. Authority comes from presence. Respect comes from not surrendering to every emotional impulse. He had stopped chasing, and everything changed. Not because she transformed, not because he manipulated, not because of a trick or a game, because he finally became himself. From that day forward, every interaction was different. Every conversation had weight. Every moment of silence carried meaning. He no longer begged for attention. He no longer feared absence. He no longer leaked energy. He reclaimed himself, and in doing so, he reclaimed the balance of attraction. That is the truth most men never learn. Chasing does not prove value. It dissolves it. Silence does not create distance. It creates clarity. Calm does not remove attraction. It deepens it. And now, he had learned it, and so can you. If this story opened your mind, if you felt the weight of chasing and the power of self-control, then you already understand what this channel is about. This is the manipulated mind, where psychology is revealed, not abused, where awareness becomes strength and strength becomes freedom. If this video changed how you see relationships, like it, share it, and subscribe to the Manipulated Mind, because once you understand the rules, you can never unsee them, and the next story might just change the way you see power entirely.